Hello, Steve White, Steve Arts 89. Well, I recently watched the Conversations with the Killer John Wayne Gacy tapes, and it kind of got me interested in John Wayne Gacy again. I'd seen a bunch of documentaries on him years ago, blah, 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 and I kind of thought I knew the whole story. Um, and this did throw some light. I mean, it did also manage to highlight the victims in a different way, which I found really touching and interesting, but it also kind of highlighted a lot of the conspiracy theories and lies that John Wayne Gacy spread or tried to spread after he actually was put in jail. And some of the theories around his crimes now, which are kind of interesting. And I watched another series from Peacock, which actually came out a year ago. Somehow I missed it. It's a six-part special. It's called John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise. And it was interesting. It's 6 hours, basically. They really get into it, which is good because a lot of these documentaries brushed over a lot of stuff. Like you do a 45-minute documentary, compare that to 6 hours. There's a lot of stuff that you can't include and can't go into. And the interviews with a lot of the people were really amazing and disturbing. I don't know what's more interesting. The fact I never knew that there was a second dig, basically, where there was a block of land, a house on a corner that his mother lived in that John Wayne Gacy was the caretaker for. And he apparently was digging holes for drainage and so forth there, which is a tad little bit suspicious for him. So they had people questioning that for a while. There were people saying there was a lot of strange goings on at the time, but it wasn't really looked into properly. Eventually in 1998 they actually did a dig, but for some bizarre reason the company that did a bunch of echo searches where they found a bunch of questionable things in the ground that should have been investigated, instead they went and dug two holes, I think it was, around where a tree used to be. And there's no way that anything would have been buried where the tree was back in the day, and that was the one spot they were told not to dig in. That's the only spot they dug in. And I'm like, that kind of seems like when Marilyn Monroe's investigation was reopened and they didn't interview any of the people that had provoked, whose comments and accusations had actually provoked the inquest to be opened again. They interviewed all the same people who gave the exact same statements and nothing was achieved. It's like, wow, it's almost like they didn't want to uncover anything there. And I'm like, is this a bunch of conspiracy theory or is this something that's happening? Because there's some interesting things. Now, John Wayne Gacy definitely killed those boys and buried them under his house. There's no question there. He may have used people to dig some of the holes that were working for him, and these people may have convinced themselves they didn't know what they were digging the holes for, and because they weren't actually told, I guess they managed to live in some sort of denial, but they had to have been incredibly unintelligent to not realise what they were doing and what they were in amongst. But he might have had some accomplices. There was talk of one person who was there abusing one of the people who actually lived. So the idea that John Wayne Gacy managed to meet other people who were into that sort of thing, and he might have gotten involved with at least one or two other people like him, is not impossible, but they certainly wouldn't have done the killing and done the burying under his house for him. It would have been, he may have been involved in other murders outside of his state because he did travel around a lot, and they never looked past it. I think one of the quotes that was given was someone, when they were saying, don't you want to work this out, don't you want to uncover this, don't you want to find these other victims, they were like, we don't need any more bodies, we've already got 33, we don't need any more. And it's like there was this selfish sort of reaction from the investigators that, look, we have enough problems, we don't need more, rather than how big is this, how many people are involved, how many people do we need to bring their children's bodies home to them. So the attitude, and often the police have that attitude. It's more about them and the investigation, not about the crime or the victims some of the time. And they're not all, some of them are like that, or I don't know. I've seen a lot of bad examples over the years from police investigators who cared more about things coming out the way they wanted it than actually, finding out the truth. So we all know that story. So did that happen here? I don't know, but the idea that there do seem to be some connections to some people who were connected with some other rings of people. So It's very interesting. Now, Gacy used all these people, because apparently there were a few of them that were involved. He used them to try and escape guilt. Like, oh, it wasn't me, it was those other people I was involved with. They must have done this and hid all these people under my house while I was out at work. Literally, he said that and thought people would believe him. But why didn't he then name them and say, well, there they are, go arrest them? Because, he probably knew they'd be found guilty of involvement from maybe 1 or 2 murders that probably weren't the ones that he was being charged with. So it just would have linked him to more murders and wouldn't have exonerated him from any of the murders he actually did, but it would have incriminated people that he was involved with. So that's why I believe he never named any of those people and actually protected them. But I do think there was a wider circle of things happening there. But that's something I was never aware of before. I had no idea that there was a second dig, there was a second property which supposedly, allegedly could have had bodies buried on it, and that there are other people who were involved. I knew that some of the kids he worked with and had worked for him, he'd involved them in the burying of the bodies and that, because he got them to dig the holes and so forth. But like I said, they either really didn't know or managed to convince themselves that they weren't involved in anything like that. So, it was really interesting and eye-opening. There was a little bit of, I could sense a little bit of right-wing Illuminati paranoia, where they're imagining, because there is this whole movement, like those anonymous members of the Q continuum, where they believe that just all the police and all the authorities and all the governments and all the celebrities are all a big ring of, I'm not even going to go into all that. And I think some of that is feeding into this a little bit, but I think it's a legitimate investigation and legitimate concerns, and then there's that sort of sector sort of pushing it, because they're trying to push anything that tries to make the other side look bad, and it's mostly about trying to make the other side look bad and just accuse them of the most outrageous, wild, sort of paranoid, sort of evil fantasies, because they know some people will believe it. So it's kind of interesting to sort of be conscious of that little hint of political sort of whatever. I'm going to go. Feel free to share, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think. I really enjoyed it. I think it was around an hour each, so it was about 6 hours. And I watched the first 3 episodes, and then I went to bed. And then I watched the whole lot again, because I tried to watch it from halfway through, and I'm like, I kind of can't remember who said what and where this came from, and was that in the other documentary or this one? So I had to sort of watch the whole thing again. So I watched the whole thing again. And it was really great. The amount of detail, the amount of work they went into interviewing people, and some of the other little things, like one of the guys who went on the stand was too drunk from the anxiety and stress of it that he wasn't any good on the stand, and he actually committed suicide later. One of the other guys wasn't able to speak for the defence because he was writing a book, and they're afraid that would contradict the evidence and so forth, and call that the evidence into question, so they wouldn't call him to speak. So then he spoke for the defence, or was it he spoke for the other side, either way, so he flipped sides, but so he could tell his story. And just a lot of little stories that come out of it, and the horror of what happened to these boys is a lot more prevalent in these longer documentaries, where you spend time with the members of the families talking about all the examples of people who knew their kids were missing and approached the police and didn't get anywhere. And one case where a woman was told randomly late in 1980, oh yes, your child was one of these people that was killed. And there's some suggestion that the body in the grave is not actually her son, and he wasn't a victim of Gacy. And I mean, there were plenty of victims of Gacy. It doesn't really hurt anything by disproving one. But then you get to the whole, well, the police don't want this to be proven, because then if they got one wrong, they could have gotten others wrong. And it's like, well, what's more important here, the truth or protecting yourself? There's a lot of that that's accused, allegedly, that's happened in the later sort of stages of the investigation. And you sort of have to acknowledge just how horrible it was for the investigators and for those people to deal with all of this. So whether some people are genuinely just blocked on dealing with it and going further into it, and whether others are actually covering up for themselves or their department. And if there were errors made, considering what they were dealing with, it's kind of forgivable. And if they just said, look, we were overwhelmed, we made a mistake, I don't think anyone would have an issue with that, really. Maybe the families who might sue, but aside from them, no one's really going to judge them, I think, because the enormity of what they were going through with the investigation and the case. So I just would like this to continue to be explored and for us to have all the unanswered questions answered, because there's a lot of them. And I didn't realise, I thought it was really cut and dry. So my mouth is so dry, I can't talk. I really thought this was cut and dry, and I didn't think there was really any extra elements or unknown elements or things that hadn't been resolved or sorted out, but there actually are. So there could be more coming out of the Gacy case over the years, and we'll see. I'm sure we'll be kept, informed of it all by, Netflix and everything. I'm going to go. Thanks. Bye.